Can I ask you a question? Have you ever really wanted to make sourdough bread, but you just never end up having the time, having the space, or having the energy? So in the end, you just don't ever get round to it? If the answer is yes, then this video is for you, my friend. Because in this video, I want to show you how you can make sourdough bread without wasting energy, without wasting time, and without wasting space. This is artisanal sourdough bread making, made easy for you. So please keep watching. Let's start from the basics. What is sourdough bread? Sourdough is bread fermented using a sourdough starter, much like this one here. Because it's so versatile, it could be used for almost any kind of raised baked good, from muffins to pancakes to breads to patisserie. There's some sourdough starters that people are using today which were created more than 150 years ago. That's how precious these things are. So let's make some sourdough starter. Day 1. Mix together 50 grams of strong bread flour and 50 grams of water. You want to make sure you mix it really well just to hydrate all of that flour. Cover the mixture and leave for 24 hours. Day 2. Mix together 50 grams of strong bread flour, 50 grams of water and 50 grams of the mix we made yesterday. Mix all 3 ingredients together well, incorporating all of that flour. Cover the mixture and leave for 24 hours. So from day 3 to day 9, we're going to repeat exactly what we did in day 2, mixing 50 grams of strong bread flour, 50 grams of water and 50 grams of the mix we made the day before. Mix all 3 ingredients together well, incorporating all of that flour. Each day, cover the mixture and leave for 24 hours. Day 10. Congratulations, my friends. You have made your very own sourdough starter. Now you can go on to bake the most amazing sourdough breads. And if it hasn't fully fermented yet, do not worry. Just remember, this is a natural fermentation process, so it could take a little bit longer. As long as you're refreshing the mixture every 24 hours, it will finally ferment. Now we have 150 grams of beautiful sourdough starter. But let's say the recipe requires more than 150 grams. It requires, like in this recipe, 250 grams. Well, we simply just increase the amount of flour, water and the previous day's sourdough starter that we add to the mix. So let's say, for example, we're making 250 grams of sourdough starter. We will mix together 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of water and 100 grams of the previous day's sourdough starter. So we would create 300 grams of sourdough starter. We would use 250 for the recipe, then the remaining 50 we would mix again together with 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water, and it would just be reborn again into more sourdough starter to use for the next bake. This really is an ongoing yeast product that you can keep going forever. So sourdough starters are cool. Coming from me, maybe not very cool, but yeah, they're cool. So we've covered the sourdough starter. Now I just want us to talk a bit about flour, because the type of flour we use will greatly impact on the structure that's formed inside the crumb of the bread. The general rule of thumb is, if the gluten is higher, the larger the structure of the crumb will be. Because gluten, which is a protein, is so elastic, when the sourdough starter releases carbon dioxide, it pulls the gluten strands into those big, lovely pockets of air that we love to see in artisanal breads. Whereas with gluten-free flours, there isn't the same elasticity, so you just have really small pockets forming, and it's slightly denser than it would be if it was a gluten flour. For this recipe, I'm going to be using a combination of half spelt flour and half wheat flour. These are 2 high gluten flours, and I'll be using them because I want to achieve those large pockets of air. But in a video coming soon, I will be using flours such as rice flour and buckwheat flour, which are completely gluten free. So please check out those videos when they go live, and don't think I've forgotten you guys who have gluten allergies or are wheat intolerant, because I am thinking of you and there are recipes coming. So to make this bread, we're going to be using a dough mixer. Traditionally, sourdough breads are kneaded by hand, and bakers are going to tell you that kneading by hand is more satisfying and can potentially make the bread more tasty. However, there are a lot of people who want to make sourdough breads but just haven't got the time, haven't got the space, and they just haven't got the energy. If you've come home for a long day at work, the last thing you want to do is start putting dough on a table, messing the table up, having to put a lot of energy getting the dough to the right consistency, and then having to clean the table up. I mean, that's 100% understandable. People just want a quick and efficient way to cook, and the dough mixer is going to help us achieve that. I suggest this machine here, the KitchenAid, solely because when I've worked in Michelin star restaurants, the machine I have here, which I bought on Amazon and anyone can buy for their home, is the exact same as what they use in the top Michelin restaurants, the top bakeries. It's exactly the same machine. It's one of the only few pieces of equipment that you'll see that transition from home and very fine establishment. The motor on it's amazing, and it is very, very, very reliable. The price range is between 400 and 600, so it's quite expensive. And I only recommend it if you're going to be baking a lot and it's going to get a lot of use. If you're not going to be baking much and you just want a dough mixer for light use, go for a cheaper option. But if you're going to be doing a lot, I highly recommend getting a better machine, because in the end it's going to be well worth it, and you'll probably save money because a cheaper machine might break. So that's my recommendation. Now we have our sourdough starter, we know what flour we're using, we can begin to make bread. Yes! Let's begin. Whip out your scale. We're gonna weigh the sourdough directly into the mixing bowl because it can get a bit messy. So that's 250 grams of sourdough starter. I recommend using a bench scraper to scrape it into the bowl. Then into a measuring bowl, weigh out 250 grams of spelt flour and 250 grams of strong bread flour. Add this into the mixing bowl. Measure out 5 grams of salt and also add that into the flour. Finally, measure out 275 grams of water and pour it in. And that is seriously all you need for great bread. After we've attached the dough hook, we're going to run the machine on a medium setting. On the KitchenAid, that's setting 3. Let that run for 3 minutes. You should see the dough getting increasingly sticky as the dough hook stretches it out. That's absolutely normal. When all the sides of the bowl are relatively clean and the dough resembles a kind of putty-like consistency, turn off the machine and remove the dough hook, and using the bench scraper, scrape down the sides of the bowl, trying also to scrape right down the bottom of the bowl to make sure there's no unmixed flour. Turn on the machine again, but this time on setting 2, and run for a further minute. So the way to tell if the dough's developed or not is pretty simple. You just grab a piece off of the dough, like this. Should be very elastic by now. And you just stretch it out between your fingers. And what you want is a kind of window pane effect. This is in fact called the window pane test. And you want it to not rip, and you want the light to pass through. So you can see that it's kind of good. It's just ripping a little bit, so I just want to run it for a little bit more. Okay, so this should be done now. I'm just going to come up to the camera to hold it a little bit closer, just to see if you can get the effect. So, what we want is the light to pass through. Okay, so that's it for the kneading. The window pane test shows us that the gluten is fully developed and very elastic, and we definitely don't want to knead anymore because we can break those glutens down as well. So stop the machine and we'll move on. Take 2 bread tins. These are meant to be 2-pound bread tins, but I'll put the exact measurements of the tins in the description below, just so you can know exactly what I'm using. Drizzle both with a little bit of oil. I use extra virgin olive oil, just to give a tiny bit more flavour to the bread, but as it's just for greasing, you can use any cooking oil. Use your hands to rub the oil inside the tin. We want to make sure the tin is really well oiled. This is a really easy way to make sure that the dough doesn't stick to the sides of the tin during baking. Sprinkle some flour into one of the tins, and then tap the flour around to fully coat all of the sides. Then tap any excess flour into the second tin and simply repeat the process again. Then discard any excess flour. Coat your hands in a small amount of oil. This will make it easier for you to handle the dough and shape it in your hands without having the hassle of having to put the dough on yet another surface. Twist the dough in your hands to break it into 2 pieces. Then take one of the pieces and begin to tuck the dough in on itself at the bottom, so that we can stretch out the top of the dough. As you see here, it's getting tighter and tighter. Then carefully pull the dough into a rectangle shape and put it into the tin. Then carefully, with your fingertips, push the dough into all 4 corners of the tin. Repeat the exact same process with the second piece of dough. And don't be afraid to put a little bit more oil on your hands if it starts sticking. Just give the 2 pieces of dough a final stretching into those deep corners of the tins. Then cover the tins with 2 damp cloths. It's so important that these cloths are damp, as we desperately don't want the dough to dry out while it's proving. Now leave them to prove for at least 3 hours, or until doubled in size. But first, before I go and kick my feet up and relax with some Netflix, I just want to whack this oven up to its highest temperature, which is 250 degrees Celsius. I'm doing this 3 hours before I start baking because when I put my dough in, I want this oven to be scorching hot. So when the dough goes in, it's blasted by heat. I'm also going to put in this steam pan, which I also want to be scorching hot. When I put my dough in, I'm also going to put water in here. And when the water hits the metal surface, it evaporates instantly and creates steam all through the oven. And then that will hydrate the outside of the dough, so the outside will remain moist while the inside's cooking, and the outside will cook last. So this is going in now. And now I can relax. I can relax. I can relax. I can relax. I can relax.
Through the wide and unregulated distribution of these birds, avian influenza could easily spread throughout the city. But to these traders, it's simply business.
So it's just gone 3 hours since I started to proof the dough. It's a beautiful morning, the sun's just come up. I'm going to go in now and I'm going to check the dough. Oh yeah, these are perfect. Doubled in size and just reaching the rim of the tin. Look, if you give it a little shake, it should just wobble slightly. Oh, I'm so excited about baking these. We want to be well prepared around the oven area because we need to start working as quickly as possible from this stage on. So make sure you have everything you need at arm's reach. To score the dough with a traditional baker's mark, I'm going to use a pair of regular old scissors. Professional bakers, I'm sure, are crying right now because they use a specialist blade called a lamb. But if you're not planning to open a bakery, don't worry too much about copying the professionals. Scissors will do the job just fine. So here I'm cutting a semicircle or an ear into the top of the dough. This will hopefully open up slightly while baking and give the dough a little bit more opportunity to rise. And in they go. Working quickly and with oven gloves on, take a cup of hot water and pour it into the steam pan we placed in the bottom of the oven earlier. As soon as the water hits that hot pan, close the door. Now, if you're a nerd like me, you'll probably stand by that oven door and watch every second of those beauties rise. I'm ashamed to say that's probably what I do every single time. As this is artisanal sourdough bread, we want to bake the bread until the crust turns a beautiful dark brown. Almost charring the bread gives it a beautiful, slightly caramelized char-grilled flavour. Oh, come on. Is that not heavenly? One word. Yummy. And there you go. This is artisanal sourdough bread made in 4 hours with very little work, probably about 20 minutes of work altogether. Once you've taken the bread out of the oven, let them just sit on the side for about 30 minutes to cool down, because at the moment they're still cooking inside of the crust, and if we start eating it straight away it will be slightly stodgy. So I'm going to take these through and we're going to cut it and see what kind of crumb we have. Let's go. Oh, here they are. They've cooled down, and now all that's left is to cut them open and see what the crumb's like inside. Okay, let's go. I just want to add here, as you'll see with the visuals, that this bread goes absolutely amazingly with extra virgin olive oil and balsamic vinegar. Just simply pour into a small pot a 5:1 ratio of extra virgin olive oil to balsamic vinegar and just go for it. Tear the bread, dip it in and enjoy. But beware, this method of consumption is extremely addictive.